Last week I talked about the fact that we want to be a church where people experience the presence of God and how they respond to God then in joyful and humble worship. But we also talked about the fact that that doesn't automatically happen. And so how do we cultivate in our hearts this kind of worship for God? I think the answer that Jesus gives is in some of his last words in the Gospel of Matthew. It's in other places as well, but in Matthew 28, Jesus says, "Go and make disciples of all nations and baptize them and then teach them everything that I commanded you." If you remember all the way back to week 1 where I was talking about our mission statement to increase joy in Jesus among our neighbors in the nations, I read from Psalm chapter 67 where the psalmist says, "Let the nations be glad in the one true God." Well, how are the nations going to be glad? Jesus says here, by going and making disciples of the nations. Well, what's going to bring the nations to the point of joyful and humble worship? By making disciples of the nations, I believe, is Jesus' answer. And so, what is discipleship? Discipleship's just what Jesus said. It's teaching people who he is. It's teaching them what he said. And then teaching them and helping them learn in very practical ways to obey everything that he's commanded. And discipleship happens in several different contexts. I mean, we disciple when we open God's Word as a church body and we preach God's Word to the people. Discipleship happens in smaller groups, maybe home groups of 12 or 15 people, where we open the Bible, we read it, explain it, and apply it to our lives. But in our church, we're going to do those things. Those things are absolutely crucial. They are essential to the life of the church. But for one of our values, we want to place particular emphasis on what we call personal and multiplying discipleship. And that may sound complicated, but it's really pretty simple. We are praying that God would build our church in such a way that every single member has at least one discipling relationship ongoing in their life as a Christian. It could be a neighbor, it could be a coworker, it could be a family member, whatever the case may be, that every single member is committed to having at least one discipling relationship ongoing all the time. And that's the personal side. The multiplying side is that they wouldn't just do that for the sake of that one relationship, but they would actually disciple, they would train, they would teach, they would instruct, they would encourage, they would challenge that disciple in such a way that then they could be released to go out and do the same thing. That they would find someone in their life that they could disciple as well. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I think it's what Jesus showed us in the Gospels. It's what he commanded here in what we call the Great Commission in Matthew 28. And it's the example we see in the book of Acts. It's exactly what the disciples did. They went out and they did what Jesus had done. They made disciples. If that's something that you can get excited about, which is something I've been saying every week, like, hey, I want to be a part of a church that's doing that. We would love for you to come and check us out as a church and see what we're all about.